Welcome to the deep dive. We take a huge stack of sources, boil them down, and give you the essential insights. And today, we're really digging into something historically important.
We are.
We're trying to move past this kind of limiting idea of the Celtic fringe, you know?
Exactly. That whole idea of just like a few isolated groups clinging on in Ireland or Scotland, it misses the big picture.
So what's the mission today?
Well, the mission, drawing on everything from classical writers to archaeology, and crucially, the old myths, it's to show the Celts as this vast formative force.
Formative for Britain, for Europe even.
Absolutely. For history, literature, art, we need to pin down the essential character of this culture, this race.
Okay, and that means pulling together sources covering, what, almost 1,000 years? History, myth, Druidism, the big sagas from Ireland and Wales. It's a lot.
It is a lot. And the goal isn't to drown you in detail, but to find the core thread. What made the Celts distinct? How did that spirit survive?
And why does it still matter now?
Precisely. Why it's still relevant for understanding our world.
All right, let's jump in. This idea of vastness. When we talk about Celtica, just how big are we talking historically?
We're talking huge. An ancient domain that stretched right across Europe. I mean, this wasn't just some fringe group.
Okay.
Think about this. The sources tell us they were major players way back, like 334 BC, Alexander the Great, the conqueror.
The Alexander the Great.
Yes.
Yeah.
He actually made a formal compact, a treaty with Celts living near the Ionian Gulf.
A treaty? Wow, that suggests real political power, not just, tribal raids.
Exactly. He was making sure his flank was covered in Greece while he went off to conquer Asia. The sources even describe the Celtic envoys who met him.
What did they say?
Haughty bearing, great stature. These were serious negotiators, warriors recognized at the highest level.
Yeah.
They were right there in the mix of ancient world politics.
Puts them center stage, really. And you mentioned this empire left traces, literally in the landscape, place names.
That's one of the clearest fingerprints they left. We can literally map their spread using Celtic word elements.
Okay.
Take Dunham,
Which means?
fortress or castle. You see it all over the British Isles, obviously. Dundalk, Dunrobin, familiar names.
But it goes way beyond that, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's continental. Think of France now. Lyon was originally Lugdunum. Verdun was Virodunum.
Lugdunum, named after the god Lugh.
Very likely, yes. And you find Dunum in Switzerland, Minodunum, Iburodunum. Even Leiden in the Netherlands, that famous city, its root is Ligdunum.
And the Romans, when they arrived, they didn't just wipe these names out.
Often not. They translate or Latinize them. So in Britain, the Celtic Dunum often became the Latin castra camp or fort.
Like Colchester.
Exactly. Camullo Dunum became Colchester, Brano Dunum became Brancaster, and just to show how far east they reached early on,
Go on.
Singi Dunum, that's the ancient name for modern Belgrade in Serbia. Novi Dunums is now Izaksha in Romania. I mean, their early footprint was gigantic.
That geographical spread, though, it makes the question of identity really tricky, doesn't it? Especially in Britain. If they mix so much, how do we even define Celt now? We usually just point to the languages in the West.
It's much, much more complicated than that. The sources really challenge these neat ethnic boxes we try to create. There are these historical methods, sometimes called relative nigrescence.
Right, classifying people by physical traits, hair and eye color, that sort of thing.
Yes. And those old studies, controversial as the methods might be now, they pointed to something counterintuitive.
Which was?
Well, that large parts of England, places like Lancashire, West Yorkshire, Staffordshire, even bits of Sussex, were classified as having populations whose physical traits were just as Celtic, maybe even more so, than parts of North Wales or Ireland.
So the people didn't just vanish when the Anglo-Saxons arrived.
Not at all. The population flow, the deep settlements, it meant that even areas we think of as purely English had this really deep Celtic layer that just persisted for centuries.
So the idea of a clear dividing line, Celtic here, English there, it's kind of artificial.
Largely, yes. There's a great little anecdote in the sources about this historian, Freeman. Very strong English identity, would have hated being called Celtic.
Okay.
But physically, apparently he looked exactly like a Welsh farmer named Evans. It just shows you that shared background, that genetic legacy. It's embedded right in the core of England, not just on the fringes.
That complexity really highlights Ireland's role then, its unique position.
Ireland is absolutely crucial for understanding how this culture survived in a purer form. The key fact, the sources hammer this home, is that Roman legions never conquered Ireland, never even visited officially, really.
And that lack of Roman occupation meant?
It meant that the native Celtic civilization, the art, the stories, and critically the language, the oldest form, Gaelic or Goidelic, could develop without that direct Roman overlay. Ireland became this bridge, connecting the ancient pagan Celtic world to the later Christian era, preserving something unique.
And the language itself, the Gaelic, had a specific marker, didn't it? Something about the letter P.
Yes, it's fascinating. The Goidelic Celts, the first wave, they seem to really dislike the P sound.
Dislike it? How?
Well, they either dropped it like the Indo-European word pair, meaning beside, became R in Gaelic names like Armursi, or they changed it to a C or K sound. Linguists call it the P loss.
Why is that significant?
Because it's the main linguistic clue that separates the oldest Celtic branch, the Goidelic speakers in Ireland and Scotland, from the later Celts on the continent and in Wales, the Cymric or Brittonic speakers. The older branch is often called Q Celtic.
Q Celtic, why Q?
Because of how they handled an original Proto-Celtic Q sound. They kept it as a hard C, or Q. Think of the word for four. In Q Celtic, it was something like Quechuares.
Okay, so the older branch kept the Q, lost the P. What about the younger branch?
They eventually learned to say P. This seems to have happened around the 6th century BC on the continent. They not only adopted P, but often swapped it in for older C sounds, so that Q Celtic Quechuares became Pechuares in P Celtic.
Ah, so Pechuares, that's the P Celtic version.
Exactly. That PQ split is the key marker showing the divergence and confirming how old and isolated that Goidelic tradition in Ireland really was.
That kind of linguistic detail, plus the early power you mentioned, it sets the stage for how the Greeks and Romans saw them. What was the classical take on the Celtic character?
Well, the classical writers saw this striking duality, almost contradictory. M. Porcius Cato summed up the Gauls perfectly. He said they were devoted to two things, the art of war and subtlety of speech. Re militarem et argute loqui.
The warrior and the orator, side by side.
Yep. Brute force and clever talk. And that combination, well, it clearly made an impression on the Romans, both impressive and probably a bit unnerving.
So you got different reactions.
Definitely. Very polarized views. Way back in the 5th century BC, you have Hellanicus of Lesbos saying the Celts practiced justice and righteousness. Suggests a pretty high standard.
But later writers weren't so complimentary, especially those who fought them.
Right. Polybius gives this really harsh critique. He claims they were basically driven headlong by their passions and never submit to the laws of reason. Total slaves to emotion.
And Caesar, he fought them extensively.
Caesar's view is maybe more balanced. He saw they were incredibly brave, eager for battle, but also, prone to superstition and could lose heart quickly if things went wrong. They didn't have that Roman discipline maybe, but amazing individual courage.
That mix of, high ideals and raw passion. Maybe the Romans were encountering different Celtic groups at different times.
That's very likely. The Celts near the Mediterranean in the 5th century BC were probably different from the tribes Caesar met hundreds of years later in Gaul. But that core theme persists: huge energy, capacity for extremes, good and bad.
Okay, moving from character to creativity. The sources talk about a unique artistic flair, especially how they borrowed ideas but then completely changed them.
They had this incredible talent for artistic adaptation. Look at the Latin culture, which really took off after the 5th century BC. They borrowed motifs like the palmette, that fan-shaped leaf design from Greek art.
But they didn't just copy it.
Not at all. They twisted it, curved it, made it abstract. It became this incredibly complex, flowing system of spirals, triskelions, the classic Celtic knotwork style.
It gets that unmistakable Celtic tinge, as the sources say.
Exactly. And they put it on everything: weapons, chariot parts, even fancy personal items like mirrors and toilet appliances. They took a Greek seed and grew this totally unique artistic forest, pure abstraction.
And they didn't just adapt styles, they invented new techniques too.
Yes, their big technological breakthrough, artistically speaking, was enameling, fusing colored glass onto metal.
That was purely Celtic.
Apparently, yes. A uniquely Celtic invention. The Greeks and Romans didn't know how to do it until they learned it from the Celts. Even centuries later, like the 3rd century AD, Roman writers still talked about it like it was this strange barbarian craft.
Wow, a sophisticated art form they mastered first.
Absolutely.
Now, before we get deep into religion, we have to touch on the Celtic women. The sources make them sound formidable.
They really do. It's a big contrast to women in Roman society at the time. Gallic women are described as tall, beautiful, blue-eyed.
Yeah.
But Diodorus Siculus gives this very stark warning.
Which is?
He says, basically, tangling with a Gallic man is dangerous. But if his wife gets involved, then you're in real trouble. He calls it, indeed, desperate.
Desperate? Why? What would they do?
They'd apparently rush into the fight, maybe even in chariots alongside their husbands. Diodor says they'd strike with their huge snowy arms like a catapult. They weren't just bystanders, they were part of the fighting force.
That connects perfectly with figures like Queen Maeve in the Irish myths, leading armies, or the historical Boudica in Britain.
Exactly. It shows that image of the powerful, decisive woman wasn't just myth, it had a basis in reality, or at least in how they were perceived by outsiders.
Okay, so you have this incredible individual power, male and female, this artistic genius. Why didn't they build a lasting empire like Rome? What was the political weakness?
That brings us right to the core issue, according to the sources. The absolute dominance of religion, or, maybe better put, sacerdotalism, the power of the priestly class.
More powerful than patriotism or loyalty to a king?
It seems so. They lacked that strong, secular, unifying force. Roman patriotism, Teutonic loyalty to a chief. That kind of secular glue just wasn't as strong as the power held by the Druids.
So the Druids weren't just priests, they were the real power brokers.
Essentially, yes. They were this all-powerful caste. They controlled religious doctrine, yes, but also all secular learning, law, history, science. And they kept that knowledge very tightly within their own group.
How do they enforce their power?
Through spiritual sanction, interdiction. If someone disobeyed a Druidic ruling, they were basically excommunicated, shunned by everyone, barred from sacrifices, considered wicked. In that society, being cut off like that was effectively a political death sentence.
Is there a historical example of this power in action, overriding even a king?
A really dramatic one from Ireland. The Cursing of Tara, around AD 560. King Dermot MacRevol, the High King, tried to assert secular law against the church over some prisoner.
And the church pushed back.
Oh, did they ever? The cleric, Ruadan, basically put a curse on Tara itself, the ancient seat of the High Kings. He declared, "Desolate be Tara forever and ever."
And people actually listened. They abandoned the capital.
Completely. The popular fear of that curse, that ecclesiastical power, was so overwhelming that Tara was just abandoned. It effectively ended any real secular central government in Ireland for centuries.
Because faith, or maybe fear, was stronger than the state.
Exactly. King Dermot himself apparently cried out, "Woe to him that with the clergy of the churches battle joins." It shows Druidism, and the system that followed it wasn't just about belief, it was the ultimate political reality.
Okay, let's dig into that belief system. Early Celtic religion is often called magic. What does that actually mean in this context?
Yeah, that's important. It wasn't like Greek polytheism, with gods as distinct personalities, often separate from nature. For the Celts, the core idea seems to have been this spiritual force, this vitality that was in everything, in all of nature.
Not clearly defined gods, but a pervasive power.
Exactly. Obscure, mysterious, powerful, maybe even terrifying because it was so unknown. And the Druids were the ones who mediated, who understood, maybe manipulated this elemental magic.
Pliny the Elder, the Roman writer, he seemed quite impressed by the Druidic system, didn't he? He didn't just dismiss it as primitive superstition.
Not at all. Pliny actually defined magic, capital M, as this combination of three incredibly powerful systematic arts: medicine, religion, and mathematics, which included astronomy. He saw it as intellectually complex.
And he even speculated about its origins.
This is really provocative. Pliny looked at the elaborate rituals and knowledge, particularly in Britain, and he wondered. He actually suggested it was so advanced, it was almost as if the Druids in Britain might have taught magic to the Persians, not the other way around.
Wow. That completely flips the usual narrative of influence flowing from east to west.
It does. It suggests this highly developed indigenous system of knowledge in the West that genuinely impressed, even startled, Roman observers.
And this system, this Druidism, it wasn't built from scratch. It had older roots.
That seems clear for the sources. The Druids and the whole Celtic spiritual outlook were heavily influenced by the people who came before them, the megalithic builders.
The ones who built the stone circles, the dolmens, the passage tombs like Newgrange, the Neolithic people.
Exactly. These were pre-Celtic Stone Age people, but their spiritual focus seems to have profoundly shaped what came later.
So Druidism was like the imaginative Celtic spirit layered onto the beliefs of this older culture.
That's a good way to put it. The megalithic religion was intensely focused on death and the afterlife. You see it in their elaborate tombs, hints of a powerful priesthood. It even has echoes of ancient Egyptian concerns.
So the core Druidic idea is mysticism, The focus on the underworld might have come from them.
It's very likely.
Yeah.
That emphasis on the afterlife, the cult of the dead, seems to have been imposed on the perhaps more naturally vibrant Celtic temperament by this older, deeply rooted population they absorbed or learned from.
That focus on the dead lines up with what Caesar said about the Gauls claiming descent from Dis, the underworld god.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Caesar notes Dis, or Pluto, was considered their main ancestor god. And this belief shows up in their customs, too, like how they calculated time. They started their 24-hour day at sunset. Night came before day. It reflects that worldview. Darkness precedes light, death precedes life. A constant orientation towards the realm of the departed.
And you can see symbols of this preoccupation carved right into those ancient megalithic stones.
You can. There are these striking recurring motifs. Take the Solar Ship. Carvings at Newgrange in Ireland and also at Loch Mariacher in Brittany look very similar to the Egyptian solar park.
That's symbolized.
The journey of the soul after death, guided by the sun god across the waters to the afterlife. Seeing it in Western Europe suggests a shared ancient cosmology focused on that journey.
What about those other mysterious carvings, the cup and ring marks?
Those are fascinating and still poorly understood. You find them everywhere, from Scotland to Spain, even further afield. Circles, spirals, cups cut into the rock, sometimes with channels leading out. Their sheer geographic spread and the effort involved tells us they were deeply significant.
Well, what did they mean?
We don't know for sure. Theories range from maps of the stars to symbols of fertility, maybe sites for magical rituals, or simply markers of holy ground. Whatever they were, they point to a shared sacred symbolic language across vast distances in prehistory.
This intense focus on religion, priesthood, the afterlife, it also had a much darker side, didn't it? Human sacrifice.
Yes, the sources are pretty explicit about this, especially in Gaul. Caesar described how, to appease the gods, sometimes prisoners, criminals, or even apparently innocent victims were put inside huge wicker figures and burned alive.
A horrifying image. Was that a Celtic invention or also inherited?
The thinking is that it was likely a survival from those older Neolithic, megalithic traditions, which the Druidic priesthood then perpetuated, perhaps even amplified. We also hear about it in Ireland, references to an idol called Crom Cruach, the Bloody Crescent, that supposedly demanded child sacrifices for good harvests.
It's a stark reminder of the brutal realities underlying some of this sophisticated culture.
It is a powerful pre-Christian world with very different values.
Okay, let's transition from the religious practice to the stories that preserve the spirit, the Irish mythological cycles. These are foundational texts, right?
Absolutely. They're the bedrock of Celtic literature. The first cycle, the mythological cycle, sets the stage for Ireland itself, telling of wave after wave of inhabitants.
Like Partholon and Neamed.
Right, early groups wiped out by plague. Then the Firbolgs, the men of the bags, often seen as representing an earlier, maybe subjugated people.
And then come the gods themselves.
The Tuatha De Dan, the people of the goddess Dana. They're the divinities who arrive in Ireland, bringing 4 incredible magical treasures.
I remember reading about those. The Leah Fail, the Stone of Destiny.
That's the one. And Lu's unstoppable spear, Nuada's invincible sword, and the Dagda's cauldron, which could feed an endless army. Classic magical objects.
Well, they don't rule forever. The Milesians arrive.
Right. The Milesians, the sons of Mild, they represent the historical Celts, the ancestors of the Gaels. They actually defeat the Tuatha De Danann in battle.
What happens to the gods then?
They don't disappear entirely. They retreat into the other world, into the side, the fairy mounds. They transform from ruling deities into the hidden magical folk of later Irish legend.
So that transition from gods to heroes, who's the key figure bridging that gap? You mentioned Lu earlier.
Lu, for the long-armed Luc Lemfada. He is absolutely pivotal. He's the Ildanach, the all-craftsman. He embodies that Celtic ideal of mastering multiple skills.
There's a famous story about him arriving at court, isn't there?
Yes, at the court of King Nuada, the Silver Hand. He gets stopped at the gate, and the gatekeeper asks what art or skill he possesses because they already have experts in everything.
And Lu
just lists them all. I'm a carpenter, a smith, a champion warrior, a poet, a historian, a sorcerer, a physician, a cupbearer, a metal worker. He goes on and on.
The gatekeeper must have been stumped.
He tries to dismiss him, saying, "We've got someone for each of those." But Lu hits him with a killer question. But do you have any one man who possesses all of these arts together?
And the answer is no.
Exactly. He has to be let in. It shows the incredible value placed on combined talents. Artistic, intellectual, martial. And his big moment comes in the Second Battle of Moytura against the Fomorians. The monstrous giants. Yes, specifically against the Fomorian tyrant Balor the Evil Eye. Balor was Lu's own grandfather, incidentally. He had this huge single eye that could kill with a glance, so big it had to be propped open with ropes.
And Luth defeats him.
He does. With a slingshot, he casts the stone right into Balor's eye, killing him. It fulfills a prophecy and symbolizes the victory of light, skill, and intelligence over darkness and brute force. A real defining moment.
Okay, moving to the next great cycle, the Ultonian cycle. This brings us to Cuchulainn, maybe the most famous Irish hero of all. A figure of incredible power, but also tragedy.
Cuchulainn is the ultimate Celtic warrior. Almost superhuman energy. But it's often uncontrolled. He's known for his terrifying battle frenzy, the Rheastrad.
Can you describe that? The sources are quite vivid.
They are. It said his body would contort, one eye sucked in, the other bulging out. His hair would stand on end, tangled like thorns. And most strikingly, a jet of dark blood would shoot straight up from the top of his head like a fountain. He became this monstrous, terrifying force of destruction.
Pure, raw power. But he was also bound by rules, wasn't he? These geists, these taboos.
Yes, his life was governed by these complex, often contradictory, magical prohibitions or obligations. And ultimately, breaking these guys is what leads to his downfall.
How did that happen?
He was manipulated by his enemies, the Clan Calatin. They used magic and trickery to force him into situations where he had to break his taboos. The final, fatal one involved making him eat the flesh of a dog.
Why was that so bad? Just because it was taboo?
It was deeply personal. Cuchulainn got his name, which means Hound of Cullen, because as a boy he killed a giant guard dog belonging to the smith Cullen. To make amends, he swore to act as Cullen's guard dog himself until a replacement pup was trained, so his geist was never to eat the flesh of his namesake animal, the dog.
So forcing him to eat dog meat was a direct violation of his name, his honor, his oath.
Exactly. It was a perfect magical trap. By breaking that geist, his power was diminished, his doom was sealed, right before he went into his last battle.
And the story really emphasizes the tragedy, even involving his horse.
Yes, it's incredibly poignant. Just before Cuchulainn rides out to die, his loyal chariot horse, the Grey of Mancha, who had tried to warn him, is described as weeping. Not just tears, but large tears of dark blood.
Oh.
It highlights that deep, almost spiritual connection between the Celtic hero and the natural world, making his fate feel even more sorrowful and perhaps unjust.
Okay, let's move forward in time again to the Ossianic cycle. This features Finn McCombhall and his band of warriors, the Fianna, around the 3rd century AD. Is the tone different here?
Yes, there's a definite shift in atmosphere. Finn himself is less about raw battle frenzy and more about wisdom and leadership. He famously gained prophetic knowledge by accidentally tasting the salmon of knowledge.
How did that work?
He burned his thumb while cooking the salmon for his master, instinctively put his thumb in his mouth, and boom, gained all its wisdom. After that, he could access knowledge just by biting his thumb.
So more mystical wisdom, less berserker rage.
Generally, yes. And the whole cycle focuses more on the adventures, the hunts, the poetry, and the ethical code of the Fianna, Finn's standing army. It feels a bit less starkly heroic, maybe more lyrical or romanticized than the Cuchulainn stories.
What was the code of the Fianna like?
It was about truth, strength, and honor. One of Finn's men, Kealta Mac Ronan, summed it up beautifully. Truth was in our hearts and strength in our arms and what we said that we fulfilled. It's about integrity and living up to your word as a warrior band.
That difference in tone really comes through when you compare the big love stories from the two cycles, doesn't it? Deirdre versus Dermot and Grania.
It's a perfect contrast. The story of Deirdre and the Sons of Usna from the Ulster cycle is pure tragic romance, simple devotion, loyalty, leading inevitably to death because of King Connor's treachery. It's noble and heartbreaking.
Whereas Dermot and Grania, that's more complicated.
Much more. Grania is promised to the old Finn, but she desires the young, handsome warrior Dermot. She actually forces him to elope with her by putting a geese on him, an obligation he can't refuse.
So she's the driving force using magic.
Yes. And it kicks off this famous chase all across Ireland. You still find ancient dolmens called Leva, the Armornada, Aegis Crane, the bed of Dermot and Grania supposedly where they slept.
But Finn doesn't just let them go.
No, Finn's portrayal here is quite dark. He pursues them relentlessly, driven by wounded pride and jealousy, and the ending is brutal. Dermot is finally mortally wounded by a magical boar.
And Finn could save him.
Yes, Finn has this magical ability water drunk from his cupped hands can heal. His men urge him to save Dermot, but Finn hesitates. Twice he goes to the well, scoops up water, and deliberately lets it trickle through his fingers before reaching Dermot. The third time he brings the water, but it's too late. Dermot is dead.
That's cold, calculated revenge from the great hero Finn.
It shows a very different, more human, perhaps more flawed side to the heroic figures in this later cycle. It's less about divine fate, maybe more about human bitterness and malice.
Okay, these Irish cycles are incredibly rich. Let's cross the water now to Wales and the Welsh myths, the Mabinogion. Are there connections?
Oh, definitely. Especially in the four branches of the Mabinogi, you see figures and themes that clearly echo the Irish material. It suggests a shared heritage, a common Celtic mythological pool. The Welsh sea god Lear, for instance, is clearly related to the Irish Lear.
Let's look at one of the Welsh stories. Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed, and his trip to Anne, the Otherworld.
Pwyll's story is fascinating. He accidentally insults Aran, the king of Anne, the Welsh underworld or fairyland. To make amends, they agree to swap places and appearances for a year and a day. Pwyll rules Anne, Aran rules Dyfed.
And Pwyll has to fight Aran's enemy.
Yes, and he succeeds. But the really key part of the story, the test of his character, involves Aran's wife.
What happens?
Pwyll, looking exactly like Aranon, sleeps in the same bed as Aran's beautiful wife every night for that whole year. But out of loyalty to the man whose place he's taken, he never touches her. He remains completely chaste.
That level of honor, even in secret, is remarkable.
It really emphasizes that core Celtic value. Integrity, keeping your word, even when no one would know if you broke it. When Aran returns, his wife tells him how noble his replacement was, and it cements the friendship between the two kings. Pwyll earns the title Penann, head of Anne.
And Pwyll's own wife, Rhiannon, she has a really rough time in her story, doesn't she?
She does. It's a story about false accusation and patient endurance. Rhiannon's new-born son, Pryderi, vanishes mysteriously. Her own serving women, afraid of being blamed, smear animal blood on her while she sleeps and claim she devoured the child.
That's horrific. What's her punishment?
Pwyll believes the women, and Rhiannon is sentenced to a humiliating penance. For years, she has to sit by the castle gate, near the horse block, tell her story to every passerby, and offer to carry them into the court on her back like a beast of burden.
Does she actually have to carry people?
The story says few would actually take her up on the offer, out of respect, but she had to make the offer. It's a terrible ordeal, symbolizing immense suffering and injustice, until eventually her son Pryderi is found and restored, clearing her name.
These Welsh stories feel slightly different again, maybe more courtly, but still deeply strange and magical.
They definitely have their own flavor, and they lead us to probably the most globally famous literary tradition with Celtic roots, the Arthurian legends.
Right, King Arthur. The Grail. How does that connect back to these older Welsh myths?
The connection is deep and direct. The sources point to the Welsh tale of Peredur, son of Evroc, as being the oldest, most archaic version of the Percival Grail story. It exists in manuscripts that predate the famous French Grail romances by Chrétien de Troyes.
And what happens in this Welsh version? Is there a Grail?
Not exactly a Christian Grail as we know it. Peredur visits this mysterious castle, the Castle of Wonders. Inside, he sees a strange procession. First, two youths carry a huge spear, dripping blood. Then two maidens carry a large silver platter or salver.
Okay.
And on the platter is a severed human head, swimming in blood.
A severed head, not a cup.
No cup, a bleeding head. He later finds out it was the head of his own cousin who had been murdered, and the spear was the weapon used. The whole thing is about vengeance and family fate, steeped in magic, not Christian redemption.
So where does the Grail come from? How does a bleeding head on a platter become the Holy Grail?
This is the crucial point the sources make. If you look at those objects in the Peredur story, the bleeding spear, the platter or vessel, and compare them to the magical treasures of the Irish Tuatha De Danann.
The Spear of Lugh, the Cauldron of the Dagda.
Exactly. There's a strong resemblance.
Yeah.
The argument is that the object which eventually became Christianized as the Holy Grail likely started out as a transformation of the ancient Celtic cauldron of plenty.
Like the Dagda's cauldron that never ran empty and could restore life.
Precisely. A symbol of abundance, feasting, maybe even rebirth. That powerful pagan symbol, over time, through transmission into French Romance culture, got overlaid with Christian meaning and became associated with the Last Supper or the blood of Christ. But its roots are arguably in that pagan Celtic cauldron.
That's a mind-blowing idea. That the central quest object of medieval Christian Europe is actually a disguised Celtic magical artifact.
It's arguably one of the most significant examples of cultural borrowing and transformation in all of literature. It really shows how deeply that Celtic imagination fed into the very core of European storytelling.
Yeah. And one last point on cultural difference. The role of romantic love in these Welsh and Irish stories compared to, say, French chivalry.
Yes, it's quite distinct. While there are great love stories like Deirdre or Dermot in Grania, the overall emphasis in the earliest Welsh and Irish heroic literature isn't centered on the lady love in the same way as continental romance.
They didn't think it was important.
The sources suggest the bards and storytellers found it almost, well, maybe slightly ridiculous, to make romantic passion the absolute central driving force of a serious hero's life. Honor, loyalty to your lord, battle prowess, keeping your word for Creth. Those were paramount.
Is there an example?
In the Welsh romance of Owain, or Yvain in French, the hero Owain marries a lady, but then goes off adventuring with Arthur's knights and gets so caught up in tournaments and heroic deeds that he completely forgets about his wife for 3 whole years.
3 years? She must have been furious.
Eventually, yeah, there are consequences. But the fact that the story allows him to forget her for so long shows that, in that worldview, the pursuit of heroic renown could easily overshadow romantic or marital obligations. It's just a different set of priorities compared to the Lancelots of French literature.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, we've covered a huge amount of ground. This vast geography, the complex character, the powerful religion, the incredible art and literature. What's the big takeaway for someone listening to this?
I think the main synthesis is this. The Celts weren't just some footnote, some fringe. They were this incredibly dynamic, widespread, artistic, and deeply spiritual civilization.
And their influence didn't just die out.
Not at all. Especially where they weren't overshadowed by Roman military power, like in Ireland. Their unique culture persisted. And it didn't just persist in isolation. It actively fed into and shaped the foundations of modern European culture, particularly its earliest literature and myth.
That persistence, that's the real legacy. But you mentioned at the start why this matters now. What's the contemporary relevance of knowing all this?
Well, the sources we've been drawing on, especially the ones looking at this long history, they often conclude with a thought about the future. Specifically, the future of those communities where Celtic language and culture have survived most strongly.
The area is sometimes still called the Celtic Fringe.
Right. And the argument presented is that the best way forward for the development, ethical, social, intellectual of the people in these regions is to work on Celtic lines.
What does that mean, working on Celtic lines?
It means consciously maintaining and building upon the Celtic tradition itself. The literature, the language, the ways of thinking, the artistic spirit. The idea is that this mixed population, the inheritors of this legacy,
they'll thrive best by connecting with their deepest cultural roots.
That's the essence of it. That progress comes not from abandoning that heritage, but from embracing it, tapping into that unique spirit, the skill of Lugh, the artistry of Latin, the honor code of the Fianna, the depth of the myths that's seen as the most authentic and therefore the most effective path forward.
So understanding this deep past isn't just history, it's potentially a guide for cultural vitality today.
That's the conviction presented in the sources, yes. That connection to the deep field of the past is the key to future growth and identity for these cultures.
A powerful final thought. The legacy isn't just ancient history, it's potentially alive and relevant right now. Thank you. That was a truly fascinating dive.
My pleasure. It's an endlessly rich subject.